Good evening, and welcome to Sleepless Historian. You're in a quiet place now, made for slow stories, soft thoughts, and peaceful sleep. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let the day gently fade away. Tonight, we'll explore the quieter side of history, simple lives, strange old customs, and forgotten moments that shape the world in quiet ways. If this calm journey brings you peace or helps you rest, feel free to like or subscribe. Only if it feels right now, close your eyes. And let's begin. Story 1. Eric XIV of Sweden. Visions, poison, and a locked cellar. And now, let us drift into the cold hush of Scandinavia, where frost clings to pine trees and the sun rises late. A young king waits beside a frozen lake, his eyes sharp, his voice trembling with beauty and suspicion. This is the story of Eric XIV of Sweden, a monarch of scholars, seers, and silence. The Boy with the Hollow Crown, Chapter 1, Inheritance of a Fractured Crown. You were born not from stillness, but from storm. Richard Plantagenet entered the world in Bordeaux, France, and English territory at the time in the year 1367, during the peak of the 100 Years' War. His father was Edward, the Black Prince, a knight feared across Europe, tall, broad-shouldered, a commander who fought like thunder and bled like myth. But by the time Richard could toddle down a stone hallway, his father's body was already betraying him. The Black Prince was withering, some say from dysentery, others from wounds too deep for medicine. He died when Richard was just 10, and with that, the boy inherited not just grief, but a path toward power he hadn't asked for, a crown before puberty, when King Edward III died soon after. Richard, just a pale, slight boy of 10, was crowned King of England. Imagine him, cloaked in velvet, gold circlet too heavy on his brow, feet dangling from the edge of a carved wooden throne, his voice soft, unbroken. The great halls echoed, not with authority, but with nervous glances. Lords whispered, councils convened. A child now held the crown of a kingdom scarred by war, poverty, and plague. They called him His Grace, but behind closed doors they called him the Boy. Chapter 2. A kingdom fraying at the edgy. England at this time was not a land of peace. The Black Death had swept through just 30 years prior, leaving entire villages hollow. The peasants, once bound by feudal obligation, now smelled opportunity. With so many dead, labor was scarce and laborers ... wanted rights. Meanwhile, taxation soared, to fund campaigns in France, to pay for ships, soldiers, and royal excess. But gold was running thin, and whispers of rebellion were beginning to rise slowly at first, like wind through wheat fields. The peasants' revolt in 1381, it came to a head. The peasants' revolt, tens of thousands of villagers and tradesmen, men who once bowed at every passing night, marched on London, demanding an end to serfdom, fair taxation, the removal of corrupt officials. They surged into the city, burned records, executed tax collectors, the Archbishop of Canterbury decapitated in his own chapel, and all the while, Richard, now 14, remained inside the Tower of London, watching, listening, waiting. A moment of bravery then. Something strange happened. Richard asked to meet the rebels. He rode unarmored, exposed into the mob at Smithfield, spoke to their leader, what Tyler negotiated, promised, soothed. It worked. For a moment, he was seen as a king, not a boy. not a puppet, a monarch, but moments are fragile. Wat Tyler was killed struck down during a heated moment by one of Richard's men, and the crowd swelled with rage. Richard, in a flash of clarity, rode forward and cried out, "You shall have no captain but me." And somehow they listened. He diffused the fury, but once the rebels dispersed, Richard revoked every promise he had made. His soft voice, it turned out, could lie too. Chapter 3. A Court of Masks and Rituals in the years that followed. Richard surrounded himself with art, music, and ceremony. He designed elaborate court rituals, favoring gold-threaded robes, processions, and theatrical oaths. Some called it majestic, others called it narcissism. But for Richard, it was survival. He had no battlefield glories like his father, no parliamentary alliances like his grandfather, only mirrors, only masks, only appearances, asterisk. The cult of Magister Richard began to reshape kingship. He declared that the monarch was not merely a noble but sacred. He referred to himself as God's anointed. When he walked, no one else could wear bright colors. When he spoke, scribes recorded not just his words, but the way he looked while saying them. Paintings began to show his face. In heavenly light, he was crafting an image, and behind that image, a growing fear that without splendor, without control, he would vanish. The web of favorites Richard trusted few, but he elevated a handful of men his favorites. Michael de la Pole, Robert de Vere, young nobles with polished manners and elegant hands. They advised him, whispered to him, entertained him, and they enraged the barons, older lords war-tested. Blood-drenched saw these courtiers as nothing more than painted dolls, useless, dangerous, disrespectful. Tension tightened in the air, like an overdrawn bowstring, and Richard, too young to bridge the gap, only leaned further into the comfort of silks and flattery. The boy in the mirror late at night, it is said, Richard would walk the halls of Westminster. Alone he would touch the tapestries. He would gaze into polished mirrors, not to admire, but to make sure he still existed, to remind himself that he was still king, still real, still Richard. We leave him, now standing before a great stained glass window, the candlelight flickering in his eyes. The court behind him grows restless. The nobles sharpen more than just words. In the next section, we will follow this beautiful prince as shadows grow. Longer alliances fracture, and the pageantry of power begins to wear thin. The unmaking of majesty asterisk, a crown growing heavier. The court glitters still, but the air has changed. You are older now, no longer the child at Smithfield. Your hair falls in neat waves. Your voice is steady, but the throne beneath you feels different, less like a seat, more like a weight. Your favorites have grown bolder, so have your enemies. And in the silence of midnight council, whispers gather like frost. Chapter 1, Lords Appellant by 1386. The barons had had enough. A group of 5 powerful nobles, known later as the Lords Appellant, formed a coalition against the king's inner circle. They were Thomas of Woodstock, Duke of Gloucester, Richard's uncle, cold and unforgiving; Richard Fitzalan, Earl of Arundel, grim, pious, unflinching; Thomas de Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick, quiet but steel beneath it; Henry Bolingbroke, Earl of Derby, shrewd and cautious; the king's cousin, Thomas de Mowbray, Earl of Nottingham, loyal to power, more than person. They demanded Richard dismiss his favourites, curb spending, and yield more control to Parliament. Richard hesitated. He had always equated criticism with betrayal. He did not bend. The merciless Parliament in 1388. The barons struck harder. They summoned a session of Parliament, later known as the Merciless Parliament. It lived up to its name. Richard's dearest companions were dragged forward, accused of treason and condemned. Michael de la Pole fled into exile. Robert de Vere, Richard's closest friend, attempted to raise troops in his defense. He failed. Others were executed, hanged, drawn, and quartered beneath grey winter skies. Richard could only watch. He had no army, no leverage, only sorrow and memory. A lull in the storm for the next several years. Richard learned caution. He smiled more. He agreed to reforms. He hosted feasts for men he despised. He even married Agnes Isabella of Valois, a French princess, aged just 6. It was a political marriage more, symbol than union, but he treated her gently, and England for a while breathed more easily. Chapter 2. Revenge in Silk. But Richard had not forgotten nor forgiven. He waited, and in 1397, nearly a decade after the merciless Parliament, he moved quietly, precisely. He arrested the Lords Appellant. Warwick was exiled. Arundel was executed. Gloucester Richard's own uncle was sent to Calais, and died there mysteriously, likely smothered on royal order. Even Bolingbroke and Mowbray, once loyal, then cautious, were exiled after a staged quarrel. Richard was no longer the boy who pleaded as Smithfield. He was a man now, and he would rule alone. Chapter 3. The Absolutist Dream between 1397 and 1399. Richard ruled as he had always dreamed. Absolute, unquestioned, divine. He restructured court, ceremonies to heighten his majesty. No one could address him directly without kneeling. He travelled with a canopy held aloft by golden rods. His image, radiant regal, was painted into chapel windows beside saints. He gave gifts not as generosity, but as command. Those who received them were bound by them. He told Parliament that his word was law, not merely royal suggestion. It was the reign of appearance, of control, of velvet-coated vengeance. But the kingdom felt cold. Farmers grumbled of high taxes. Merchants complained of legal entanglements. Nobles grew anxious under the glassy surface. They smiled at Richard's court, but hid their coin elsewhere. And then Richard made a final mistake in 1399, while he was away campaigning in Ireland. Henry Bolingbroke, son of the executed, John of Gaunt, returned, not with rebellion in his mouth, but with justice. He said he wanted his inheritance, just his land, just his title, but the people heard. More than that, they heard a chance to breathe. Chapter 4. A throne begins to tilt. Richard returned from Ireland to find the kingdom shifting beneath him. Bolingbroke had entered London. Without resistance, nobles were defecting. Even bishops bowed to the rising tide, and Richard's long wrapped in processions and mirrors found himself. Alone he fled, then surrendered, not with a fight, not with a speech, but with quiet disbelief. We leave him now in a cold stone cell, the ceremonial crown packed away, his garments plain, his hands trembling slightly as he watches the light filter through a barred window. In the next section, we will walk beside him to the moment he signs away his own crown and follow him into the long hush that history gave him in return. The king who was uncrowned, Chapter 1. A throne signed away September 1399. The great hall at Westminster is filled, but no one breathes too loudly. Candles flicker, scrolls lie waiting, and King Richard, too, is about to do something no English monarch has ever done before. He is about to abdicate. They bring him the parchment. He reads it aloud. Slowly, I, Richard, by the grace of God, do freely and willingly resign the crown. Some say his voice trembled. Others say he spoke with calm relief. What is certain is this: when the royal seal pressed against the wax, a new era began and a ghost was born. Chapter 2. A new king rises. Henry, Bolingbroke's son of John of Gaunt crowned King Henry IV soon after. He promised stability. Parliament nodded. The Lords bowed. But one question remained, heavy in the air. What do you do with a king who is no longer a king? Chapter 3. Confinement in shadow. At first, Richard was moved from one castle to another, not as a prisoner, not quite, but under care. No servants of his own choosing, no letters, no more mirrors. He was watched, documented, silenced, and at last, in the bleak northern fortress of Pontefract, he was kept and forgotten. The winter of 1400, the days were short. The wind howled across the stone walls, and Richard, once the sunburst prince of court, now paced alone draped in grey wool. Shoes worn thin, he ate little, spoke less. He began to talk to the walls. Some say he prayed. Others say he recited his own speeches from memory. He had nothing left but words. Chapter 4. The death of the Unkingen, February 1400. A rumour rose. Richard was dead. The news came wrapped in uncertainty. No official decree, no great procession, just whispers. Starvation, some said. A dagger in the dark, said others. A quiet, sanctioned death. No grave marker, no final statement, just ... Absence. Later, his body was quietly moved to Westminster Abbey, laid beside his queen, Anne of Bohemia, who had died years earlier and whom he had loved deeply. Chapter 5. What remains of a mirror? Richard II was never the warrior his lineage demanded. Never the statesman his country needed. But he was a poet, a patron of the arts, a believer in beauty. Even as the world turned against him, he gave us words that still survive. I wasted time, and now doth time waste me. He showed us a kingship not of conquest, but of image. And what happens when the image fades? Final reflection. And so ends the reign of Richard II, not with fire, nor rebellion, but with an empty chair, a silenced court, and a pale shadow that still walks the edges of English memory. He was crowned too young, loved too little, and remembered just enough, not for victory, but for the soft, tragic gleam of a king who ruled like a mirror in the rain. The throne stands empty. The wind presses gently against the abbey walls, and in the glass of a long-lost chapel, if the sun catches just right, you may still glimpse the faint outline of a boy who once believed being seen was the same as being safe. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 2. Emperor Justin II, the Byzantine ruler who heard the walls speak a crown of silence and silk good evening. Dear listener, ... Close your eyes, if you wish. Let your breath fall gently. You're safe. There's nowhere else you need to be. This world of golden domes, soft sandals over mosaic, and voices murmuring from behind veils is yours now. Tonight, we step into a palace heavy with incense. The air smells of frankincense and sea wind. The stones underfoot are cool, smooth, worn by centuries of empire. This is Constantinople in the 6th century. This is the Empire of Rome, long after the world has stopped calling it that, and this is the story of Emperor Justin II. Chapter 1. Inheriting a shimmering world. The man who would become Justin II was born not into glory, but into nearness to it. He was the nephew of Justinian, the first that towering emperor who rebuilt Constantinople after the Nika riots, who raised the Hagia Sophia with domes like heaven, and who reclaimed parts of the old Western Roman Empire with military brilliance. To be born in Justinian's shadow was to grow up under blinding light, and Justin knew this. He served quietly, loyally for decades. Treasurer, administrator, caretaker of imperial property. He was not a general. He did not ride into battle. He managed scrolls, not swords. When Justinian finally died in 565 CE, childless and weary, Justin calm, composed, politically connected, was elevated by the Senate and the palace guard. The new Augustus on November 14th, 565, Justin II was crowned. The coronation was full of ceremony, gold-threaded robes, chants rising from the great palace. The new emperor walking slowly beneath draped silks to the Hagia Sophia, where he was. Anointed with oil, the people applauded. He looked the part. Sharp features, noble brow, stern but not cold. For a moment, all was calm. Chapter 2. A fragile peace. Justinian had left the empire massive but stretched thin. Italy was newly reconquered, but exhausted. North Africa was plagued by Berber revolts. Persia eyed the eastern frontiers with growing boldness. The Balkans were increasingly vulnerable to Avars and Slavs, and the treasury, nearly empty. Wars were expensive. Mosaics more so. Justin II inherited the shape of an empire, but not its stability. The reformer emperor first. Justin ruled well. He refused new taxes. He reduced the size of imperial processions to avoid burdening the people. He was fair, even-handed, methodical. He and his wife, Empress Sophia, a woman of great intellect and influence, hosted open audiences in the palace gardens. They were seen as moderate, just, and importantly sane. Sophia, in particular, was admired for her steadiness. Some said she quietly advised most of Justin's policies during these early years. Diplomacy and defiance, but Justin's early reign would soon be tested. The Persian Empire, under Khosrow, I began demanding tribute once again for peace along the eastern frontier. Justinian had paid it for years, but Justin II, perhaps tired of appearing weak, or eager to make his mark, refused. He declared that Rome would pay tribute to no one. It was a proud, noble statement, and it brought war. Chapter 3. War on the horizon by 572 CE. The Persians had invaded the eastern provinces. Cities were besieged. Fortresses along the Euphrates fell. Roman generals struggled to mount an effective defense. Supplies ran thin. Communications broke down. Justin's carefully preserved image began to crack. Letters poured in from generals, from governors, from bishops, all pleading for clarity, for support, for money, for manpower. But Justin began to change. Chapter 4. The cracks begin at first. It was small things. He stopped attending meetings. He forgot names. He would order the same letter drafted, again and again, unsure if it had already been sent. Then he began pacing long, circular walks. Through the halls of the great palace, he spoke to no one, just the air and the walls. One servant reported hearing him say, "They are whispering through the stone. Even the mosaics listen." Chapter 5. Shadows in the Hall by 573. Justin II's condition worsened. He suffered what some later historians describe as a mental collapse. Today we might recognize symptoms of severe psychosis, perhaps linked to an undiagnosed neurological condition. But in his time, it was seen as divine punishment or madness. He screamed at night. He claimed phantoms tugged at his robes. He refused to eat unless the food was tasted by a priest. And then came the chariot, the wheeled front to soothe him. Palace attendants constructed a small, cushioned, chariot-like chair. They wheeled him through the marble halls, endlessly. It became ritual, soothing, circular movement. Always the same route, past the great reception chamber, down the length of the Augusteum, turning at the statue of Theodora, and back again, 16 times each morning. 12 in the evening. Chapter 6. Sophia steps in. Empress Sophia, sharp, steady, and composed, began to rule in all but name. She arranged councils, met with generals, and, seeing the crisis worsen, persuaded Justin to adopt a successor, Tiberius, a former general of sound reputation. Tiberius was named Caesar, heir to the throne, and from that moment on, he governed while Justin, circled, a palace of routine by 574. Justin was a prisoner of habit. His days were like parchment scrolls, read and reread until brittle. He awoke to the same 3 prayers. He drank only from 1 cup, fearing poison. He wore the same slippers frayed at the edge, because new shoes made the walls angry. He no longer issued commands. He no longer smiled. But still, every day he asked, "Has the whispering stopped?" We leave him now beneath a high mosaic of Christ's Pantocrator, sunlight falling through the colored glass onto his wheeled throne. The chariot does not move. The palace is quiet, save for the soft footfalls of a servant lighting incense. In the next section, we will follow the final unraveling of the emperor, the court, and the idea of sanity itself in the golden cage of Byzantium. Incense, illness, and a crown in waiting asterisk, opening tones, welcome back. Dear listener, you're still here in the shimmering halls of Byzantium. The torches burn low. The wind rustles faintly through sheer silk curtains. Outside, the Bosporus glitters, like molten glass beneath the moon. Inside the palace, the emperor is quiet, wheeled gently down the corridor, past mosaics of saints who never blink, past guards who bow, not in obedience, but in dread. The year is now 574. Justin II is still emperor, but his voice is heard less and less. Chapter 1. The man who was not king, though the title remained. Justin no longer ruled. That task had fallen, unofficially and, then officially, to Tiberius. The man Justin had named Caesar. Tiberius was no schemer. He had not seized the crown with force or manipulation. He had not plotted behind closed curtains or bribed the Praetorian Guard. He had simply accepted that the empire still needed a mind to guide it, and that Justin no longer possessed his own. The day-to-day of power in Justin's place was no small burden. The Byzantine court was deeply ceremonial. Every decree, every audience, every provincial appointment required imperial legitimacy, and so they crafted an illusion. Each decree still bore Justin's name. Each royal audience still carried the trappings of shared rule. Tiberius would stand beside the throne, but Justin wheeled in softly, draped in gold, would sit silently, sometimes nodding, sometimes staring through his own fingers. The illusion held, barely letters and lines. Tiberius, surrounded himself with scribes and theologians. Diplomats flowed in and out of Constantinople, Persian emissaries, Balkan chieftains, papal legates. He rebuilt the treasury with careful grain policy and scaled down court expenditures. He redirected coin from festivals to fortresses, and he did it all under Justin's shadow, a shadow now that paced the halls, muttering softly about demons in the cornices. Chapter 2. The voice behind the Valand. Then there was Sophia, empress, consort, watcher. Sophia had once shared power with Justin openly, but now, as the emperor frayed, she moved behind screens, behind letters, behind silence. She knew the palace better than anyone, which doors squeaked, which guards could be bribed, which bishops believed in demons, and which believed only in gold. And Sophia used that knowledge not for herself, but for the empire. She ensured food was delivered to Justin's rooms untouched. She dismissed courtiers who stared too long. She shielded the empire's dignity as best she could. But each month, the cracks grew. Chapter 3. Descent of the Mind by 575. Justin's episodes had grown stranger. He was convinced the palace fountains were poisoned. He refused to be touched by anyone wearing red. He screamed if mirrors were uncovered. And on one winter morning, he demanded to speak with Theodora, the long-dead wife of Justinian, because she had promised to return. When they refused, he slapped the air and wept. Rituals for a fractured soul. Sophia brought in monks, then bishops, then even pagan healers from remote Provence, masked and perfumed and filled with ancient herbs. They lit incense, chanted, whispered old words. Beneath his windowsill, one monk claimed Justin had been possessed by Logos Arimikos, the word of emptiness. Another claimed he was being punished for ending tribute to Persia. Another said the stars had turned against him at birth. None could cure him, but some made him calm for an hour, a day. And so Sophia kept them near. The chariot routines, the wheeled throne remained by now. It had become less ritual and more necessity. Without it, Justin would cry. With it, he could sometimes speak clearly, brief flickers of the man he had been. He asked after cities he'd never seen. He hummed a lullaby from his childhood. He once whispered to Sophia, "I think I may have died some time ago, and no one told me." Chapter 4. The cold corridor. There was one hallway Justin feared. It ran beside the imperial chapel, lined with portraits of emperors past, their faces carved in marble, staring straight ahead. Justin refused to be wheeled past it. He said they stared too long, that they whispered, that they knew he had failed. Once, when a servant mistakenly turned that way, Justin shrieked until his voice cracked the next day. Sophia had the hallway sealed with velvet drapes, and no one ever walked there again. Soundscapes and silence. The court, too, grew quieter. Laughter in the gardens was muffled. Dinners were served with less music. The emperor's name was still spoken, but always softly, not in reverence, in uncertainty. Some feared to say too much, some feared to say too little, and so they said nothing. Chapter 5. External threats. While the court tiptoed around its ruler, the empire still lived, and its enemies did not rest. The Avars, nomadic raiders from the steppe, pushed into the Balkans, besieging, burning, retreating before the legions could reach them in the east. The war with Persia dragged on, though. Tiberius had managed to negotiate a brief truce. The western provinces, once gloriously reclaimed by Justinian, were barely holding Rome, was ruled more by papal authority than imperial presence. North Africa saw uprisings along the coast, and through it all, Justin II did nothing, because he could no longer understand what needed doing. Chapter 6. The mask begins to crack in 576. Word reached the capital of a defeat near Dara, on the Persian front, and though the army still held some ground, the loss shook morale. Tiberius convened a private council. Should they remove Justin officially, declare him incapacitated? Would the people revolt? Would the church object? Sophia argued to wait, not out of love, perhaps, but out of duty, out of honor, and so they waited as the empire creaked. Chapter 7. Echoes of a Minden, his final lucid moments. Justin spoke gently. He asked if the mosaics still gleamed. He asked if the boy with the olive cart still came to the courtyard. He asked if Sophia had forgiven him for the things he had said in rage. She told him yes. Whether it was true, we do not know, but he smiled, just once. We leave him now seated in a marble alcove, wrapped in wool and golden thread, a single oil lamp flickering at his side. His eyes are closed, his breath is slow, and outside, in the night air, the bells of Constantinople ring softly, not for war, not for victory, but for a moment of stillness in a city built on sand and sunlight. The last circuit of a wheeled throne asterisk opening tones. The palace is quiet now. The shadows stretch long and violet across the ivory walls. Incense curls from the corners of the chapel, and a single bell echoes from the upper cloister. It does not toll for mass, nor for war. It tolls for the passing of time. You are standing in the final days of an emperor. The chariot no longer rolls. The whispers have gone still, but something remains. A presence. A hush. Let us walk slowly, slowly through the last hours of Emperor Justin II. Chapter 1. The Crown Without a Head by 577 CE. The fiction of Justin's rule had worn thin. The eastern provinces had become quieter, partly due to a brief peace with Persia, but the Balkans remained unstable, and Avar raids crept ever closer to the Danube. Inside the palace, the facade of dual rule Justin and Tiberius still lingered, like incense after Vespers. But no one truly believed it. Justin's voice had not been heard. Publicly in months, he could no longer sit up without support. His eyes were often open, but unseen. He muttered to himself phrases from old edicts, nursery rhymes, names of cities. Long since fallen, the man who had once declared Rome would never pay tribute, now counted the tiles on the ceiling in endless sequence. Chapter 2. The rituals of Carinside, his private apartments. Now darkened with linen over the windows, Justin was attended not by statesmen, but by caretakers. Old women from noble families served as nurses. A eunuch named Petronus whispered scripture beside him. A physician from Alexandria checked his pulse daily and left small handwritten notes in Greek notes that Empress Sophia burned every evening. He was fed broth. He was lifted and turned, lest his limbs stiffen. He was wheeled less and less, though his beloved chariot still stood nearby, its wheels cleaned, its cushions replaced each month by Sophia's orders. And through it all he spoke, gently, almost never clearly. One phrase he repeated most often was, "The lions have gone to sleep." Chapter 3. A succession secured Tiberius, now Caesar for 3 years, had won respect through restraint. He did not overreach. He did not take credit. He issued coinage with both his and Justin's face. He made donations in Justin's name, but by early 578, even the church began to ask quietly, cautiously, why the man called emperor had not spoken before the people in over a year. Patriarch Eutychius, head of the Byzantine Church, visited the palace in early spring. He prayed by Justin's bed. He placed holy water upon his brow, and when he left, he whispered simply to Sophia, "It is time." Chapter 4. The final coronation. Sophia ways, composed, always well arranged the transition with the grace of someone who had prepared for it many times in silence. Tiberius would be crowned Augustus, full emperor, while Justin still lived. It was not common, but it had precedent. On a sun-drenched morning in September 578, the ceremony took place in the Hippodrome. Crowds cheered. Tiberius stood beneath the imperial canopy. A crown was lowered onto his head. Purple boots were fitted to his feet. Sophia watched from a shaded colonnade, her face unreadable. Justin was not present, but his name was spoken, his reign honored. The fiction had become fact, and the city exhaled. Chapter 5. A slow passing. In the days after the coronation, Justin's health declined. He no longer opened his eyes. His breathing became shallow. Petronius no longer whispered scripture. He simply sat beside the bed. The wheeled throne was pushed to the far corner, covered in soft cloth, and then, on a morning touched with autumn wind, Justin's breath stopped. He was 65 years old. He had reigned for 13 years, only 7 of them in mind. Chapter 6. The funeral of a quiet emperor. His body was prepared, not with grandeur, but with tenderness. He was washed in rosewater. His skin, thin and pale, was dressed in imperial linen, not armor, no general's cloak, no military parade. He was carried in a closed bier, under cover of dusk, to the Church of the Holy Apostles, where generations of emperors lay in mosaic-lined tombs. No speeches, only prayers. A choir sang psalms in Greek. Sophia stood alone beside the marble crypt. She placed a single gold coin minted in his first year upon the stone before turning away. Chapter 7. What the palace remembered. The great palace, in time, forgot. Curtains were changed, rooms repainted, decrees rewritten anew. Throne placed in the reception hall, but there were corners that held memory. The path the chariot once took, marbled loop, was polished differently from the rest. Some servants avoided the hallway of imperial busts, and once, years later, a young scribe swore he saw a figure in a golden robe pacing slowly by the shadowed window. He said he heard only 3 words: "Are the lions sleeping?" Chapter 8. The legacy of Justin. Historians rarely speak kindly of Justin II. They call him rash for halting tribute to Persia, unstable for his decline, irresponsible for his delays in appointing Tiberius. But legacy is never owned solely by record-keepers. The people remembered the early days of fair taxes and mild judgment. The palace remembered the long silence and the kindness of Sophia. The church remembered a man who tried, if imperfectly, to walk with God in a time of ghosts, and the empire survived that. In Byzantium was legacy enough. Final reflection. And so we close the story of a man who ruled not through might or genius, but through fragility. He was no Justinian. He was no Constantine. He was Justin, a man who once believed in order, who broke beneath noise he could not explain, and who left behind a strange echo in the stones of the world's last Roman palace. You may still hear it, if you stand very still in the courtyards of the Hagia Sophia when no one else is there, and the golden dome sighs softly in the wind. Now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 3. Ludwig II of Bavaria, castles, swans, and a king who dreamed too long a throne in the clouds. Good evening, friend. Let the outside world fade. Let the voices of the day fall quiet. You are safe, and the hour is soft. Close your eyes, if you like, or gaze gently into the dark. Tonight, we journey far from Rome or Byzantium. We drift now into forests thick with pine, past the edges of mirror-like lakes, and into a land where castles rise like clouds over snow-dusted mountains. This is Bavaria, and this is the story of a lonely, dreaming king. His name was Ludwig. Chapter 1. A prince by moonlight. Ludwig was born on a summer afternoon in August of 1845 in the Nymphenburg Palace just west of Munich. He was the first son of Crown Prince Maximilian and Princess Marie of Prussia. His birth was greeted with cannon fire, pealing bells, and fireworks that lit the sky over the quiet Bavarian countryside. But Ludwig himself was not loud. He was a still child, pale, thoughtful, taught thought, drawn not to the politics of state, but to silence, to music, and to beauty. He preferred the company of paintings and poetry to the jostling noise of other boys. A childhood in echoes from a young age, Ludwig was left alone often. His father, Maximilian, was rigid and formal, a man who loved discipline more than affection. His mother was distant, preferring long walks and formal balls to bedtime stories. And so, Ludwig built his world from what he could gather: the operas of Richard Wagner, the legends of Lohengrin and Parsifal, tales of Grail knights, enchanted forests, and castles in clouds. At age 8, he wrote in a letter, "I do not want to be king. I want to live in a tower and dream." The world he inherited, but dreams do not always wait. In 1864, Ludwig's father, now King Maximilian II, died suddenly, and at the age of just 18. Ludwig became King of Bavaria. He had no experience, he had no preparation. He was thrust into a world of court ministers, alliances, budgets, and military obligations. But instead of conforming, Ludwig withdrew, not in rebellion, in retreat. He turned the court into a stage. He draped his rooms in midnight, blue and silver. He held audiences only by candlelight. He refused to eat in public. The ministers whispered, of course, but none could deny he had the presence of a king, if not the priorities of one. Chapter 2. The music of escape. Ludwig's first great act as king was not military. It was musical. Within months of his coronation, he reached out to the composer Richard Wagner, whose operas he had worshipped since boyhood. Wagner, by then exiled and in financial ruin, was summoned to court and, welcomed like a prophet, Ludwig gave him a home, an income, an audience. He even had special theatres built for Wagner's work, including a private performance hall with perfect acoustics, lit like twilight. 2. Ludwig Wagner's operas weren't entertainment. They were sacred, a cathedral of sound in which he could hide. Chapter 3. Neuschwanstein begins. But even sound was not enough. Ludwig dreamed of space, of a kingdom, not for politics, but for beauty. And so, in 1868, high in the Bavarian Alps, near the village of Hohenschwangau, he began construction of what he called the new Hohenschwangau Castle. It would later be renamed ... Neuschwanstein ... a castle of dreamstone, perched above a cliff, dripping with towers, balconies, and painted halls. Every wall inside would tell a story of Lohengrin, the Swan Knight, of sacred quests and enchanted lakes. No one had built like this. In centuries, it was not medieval. It was not modern. It was something else entirely. Building in solitude, Ludwig visited the site often, but never during the day. He came at twilight, sometimes. Midnight, he walked among the scaffolding by lantern, speaking softly to the masons. He instructed artists, personally choosing the colors of frescoes, the angle of staircases, the scent of the wood varnish. This was not a palace. This was a dream, carved from limestone. One worker later wrote, "He did not speak like a king. He spoke like a painter, except he ruled with a whisper." Chapter 4. The Swan King. Over time, Ludwig became known across Europe as the Swan King. He had adopted the swan as his personal symbol, drawn from Wagner's Lohengrin, a knight who arrives in a boat drawn by swans. He filled his halls with swan carvings. He embroidered swans into his robes. His personal stationery bore a silver swan, seal, but more than decoration. It was metaphor. Ludwig saw himself as Lohengrin, a figure from myth, forever misunderstood, and destined never to belong. He wrote in one diary, "My soul is not suited for this world. I was born in the wrong century." Retreat from the world by the early 1870s. Ludwig had ceased attending most royal functions. He stopped visiting Munich. He stopped meeting ambassadors. He spoke to ministers only at night and, often behind screens. He ate alone. He dined in mirrored rooms. He took carriage rides through the forests alone, even in snowstorms, and when he did attend performances, he sat in an empty theater, the orchestra playing just for him. He once said, "The presence of others clouds the air I breathe." Chapter 5. The letters. Though Ludwig lived in near isolation, he wrote constantly. He sent hundreds of letters to Wagner, long, poetic epistles about light, God, and the soul. He wrote to his cousin, Empress Elizabeth of Austria-Sicily, a kindred spirit of melancholy and rebellion. He wrote to artisans, architects, and stage designers, describing in obsessive detail his visions for rooms that glowed like sunset and halls that felt like rain. But in none of these letters did he speak of war, of policy, of parliament. The ministers read them in dread. What kind of king built castles in an empire at war? Chapter 6. The illusion holds still. Bavaria did not collapse. Ludwig, though distant, appointed competent ministers. He signed what needed signing. He approved budgets when they arrived with the right poetry, and he kept the peace. But the illusion grew harder to maintain. The war with Prussia in 1866 had weakened Bavaria. The unification of Germany under Bismarck in 1871 meant Bavaria was no longer truly sovereign. The cost of Neuschwanstein and Ludwig's other projects ballooned beyond imagination. Still, he built. Still, he dreamed. Still, he climbed higher into the clouds of his own making. And so we leave him now standing at a balcony window of Neuschwanstein. Stars overhead, swans asleep on the lake below, as he whispers lines from Lohengrin to the night air. In the next section, we'll follow the king deeper into isolation, into madness, and toward the still, strange waters where his story ends. The monarch of midnight *, soft return, welcome back, dear friend. The night deepens, and the air grows cooler. You are still in the mountains of Bavaria, where the wind moves softly through pine trees, and the towers of Neuschwanstein stand silent against the stars. Inside, the king is awake, always awake. This is the time he prefers. No court, no questions, only candlelight. Only the music of Wagner drifting softly through hidden speakers and long echoing halls. This is the story of a king who dreamed while others governed, and who began to believe his dreams were more real than the world outside. Chapter 1: Nocturnal Majesty. By the 1870s, Ludwig had all but abandoned daytime. He rose at dusk, drank sweet coffee in porcelain cups rimmed with gold and bathed in water. Steeped with rose petals, he dressed in robes of blue velvet, lined with ermine. He read by candlelight, dictating notes and musings to servants who stood, silent and expressionless, in darkened chambers. At midnight he rode a black sleigh, drawn by 4 white horses, sped through the snowy forest paths, the runners hissing quietly over packed snow. Lanterns hung from the sleigh's corners. Ludwig, cloaked and silent, stared forward through trees that barely moved. He visited lakes, hunting lodges, empty palaces, but never people. The lonely dinners in Neuschwanstein, he dined alone at an ornate table set for 12. Ludwig would eat silently while a stage behind him slowly rotated life-size painted backdrops. Alpine vistas, Wagnerian forests, moonlit castles, no orchestra, played, no music, just the creak of machinery and the clink of silver. Servants were never seen. Meals were hoisted through hidden shafts. He called it theatre of solitude, and for him it was sacred. Chapter 2: A world of paper and paint. Ludwig surrounded himself with fantasy literally. He commissioned countless paintings, tapestries, and sculptures based on medieval legends. Tannhauser, wandering the Venusberg, Lohengrin, stepping from his swan-drawn boat, Parsifal, touching the Holy Grail, Tristan and Isolde, eternally reaching, never touching. Every hallway was a storyboard, every stairwell a sacred narrative. Each room in his palaces served not function, but feeling. One room was painted like a night sky lit by flickering gaslight stars. Another resembled a forest gladestone trees. Velvet moss, birds, painted into the ceiling. These were not distractions for Ludwig, they were sanctuaries. Chapter 3: Wagner's Ghost. Though Ludwig had once adored Wagner, their relationship had frayed. Wagner, ever the schemer, had grown ambitious. He wanted more money, more influence. Ludwig gave. At first, but when Wagner began to interfere in politics, the ministers revolted. Ludwig was forced by pressure and necessity to distance himself from his idol. Wagner left Munich. Ludwig never stopped loving his music, but he no longer trusted the man. He wrote in a diary, "His sounds reach the heavens, but his hands reach only for coin." Even so, Ludwig still staged private performances of Wagner's operas. He watched them alone, mouthing every line. Chapter 4: Castles, Multiplanish Schwintz, was only the beginning. Ludwig began planning other dream homes. Linderhof, deep in the forest, was modelled on Versailles. Small, glittering, enclosed in roses. Herrenchiemsee, on an island in Lake Chiemsee, was a grand imitation of Louis XIV's palace, with halls of mirrors and fountains that never ceased. Each was extravagantly expensive. Each required architects, artisans, sculptors, weavers, GOLD, SMITHS. Each was designed not for court or function, but for Ludwig's personal retreat. No guests, no balls, no ministers, only silence and swans. Chapter 5. The Debt King by 1880. The kingdom was heavily in debt. Ludwig borrowed enormous sums not just from the treasury, but from foreign banks, private lenders, and family members. The ministers warned him, he ignored them. He promised payment. Once his castles opened to the public, but he never allowed the public inside. They were sacred to Ludwig. Offering admission was sacrilege, so the debts mounted and the palace lights stayed on. The gardens of quiet Atlinderhof. Ludwig created what he called his mirror gardens, paths lined with crystal lamps and polished stones, designed to reflect moonlight so perfectly that he could walk at night without torch or candle. He wandered these paths barefoot. Even in winter he spoke to statues. He sang to trees. One gardener reported seeing him kneel beside a marble faun and whisper, "Tell me when it's time." Time for what? No one ever knew. Chapter 6. The invisible King Ludwig's subjects rarely saw him. Many thought he had died. He appeared only at night, his face pale in lantern glow or behind carriage curtains. Rumors spread that he was mad, that he spoke with angels, that he was building a golden airship, that he had married a mountain spirit. Some villagers claimed he had been replaced by a double. Children believed he turned into a swan at sunrise, and Ludwig did not correct them. Chapter 7. Mind Adrift by 1884. Ludwig's behavior had grown more erratic. He ordered secret tunnels beneath castles that led nowhere. He commissioned a floating opera house on a lake that could not support it. He insisted that he and Louis XIV were the same soul, reborn. He demanded the clouds be moved on his birthday so sunlight could bless his statues. Ministers, desperate, sent physicians to observe him. But Ludwig evaded them, speaking only in riddles, refusing examinations, and once hiding in a false fireplace to avoid an audience. They could not prove he was insane, but they could no longer believe he was sane. Chapter 8. The decision in early June of 1886. The Bavarian cabinet acted. They secretly commissioned a medical report signed by 4 doctors, none of whom had examined Ludwig directly. They declared him incurably insane. A cousin was appointed regent. The king was to be taken into custody. The plan was arranged for the night. Appropriate, perhaps, since Ludwig had long lived in shadows. We leave him now in his mirrored bedroom at Neuschwanstein. The moon casts white light across the floor. The walls shimmer with swans in gold leaf. And outside, in the forest, footsteps approach not of courtiers or dancers, but of those who come to end a dream. In the next section, we'll follow the final days of the swan. King, through water, silence, and into legend. The drowning of a dream asterisk opening tones. The world outside is still now, in the hills of Bavaria. The last light of dusk fades across pine-covered slopes. The air smells of rain and wild thyme. Water moves quietly through reeds along a silver lake. Are standing beside a king's shadow, not in his palace, nor among his tapestries, but in the place where his footsteps ended. In this final section, we walk slowly, very slowly, beside Ludwig II in the final days of his life, past castle gates, into veiled chambers, and toward the dark surface of Lake Starnberg. This is the story of a man whose soul was too bright for daylight, and who vanished before the world could pull him fully back. Chapter 1. The 1886. The wind is cool across the mountains. Inside Neuschwanstein Castle, Ludwig is reading in his velvet chamber. Swans carved in ivory line the mantel. His table is set for one. Suddenly, there are voices outside, firm, measured, not his. Usual servants then, a knock. 3 times, he does not answer. The door opens anyway. A group of men enters, officials, doctors, guards. At their center stands Bernhard von Guden, the royal psychiatrist. He speaks softly. Your Majesty, by order of the state, you are to be taken into care. Ludwig does not resist. He simply nods once and says, You do not understand what I protect. Chapter 2. A king in custody. Ludwig is escorted from his castle. No crowd gathers, only the rustle of trees and the call of a distant bird. He is taken by carriage to Berg Castle, a royal villa near the banks of Lake Starnberg. There he is placed, in guarded confinement. His windows are locked, his letters read. He is allowed walks, but always under supervision. Guden, his doctor, believes the king's condition is manageable. He describes Ludwig as quiet, melancholic, but not violent. They plan a longer stay. They expect years of treatment. They expect understanding, but they forget. This is a man who lived by dream, and dreams do not like cages. Chapter 3. The Last Walk, June 13, 1886. It rains softly all afternoon. Ludwig is restless. He paces, stares at the window, requests to walk by the lake. After some hesitation, Guden agrees. The guards are dismissed for a short while at 6:30 p.m. Ludwig and Guden step into the damp evening. They walk along the shore path beneath pine, trees heavy with mist, and they do not return. Chapter 4. The Lake by Nightfall. The sky is the color of slate. The servants grow anxious. An hour passes. Then by 11 p.m., a search party is sent, and then at 11:32, bodies are found in the shallows of the lake. Ludwig's corpse floats, face dash up. His watch stopped at 6:54 p.m. Beside him lies Guden, face down, water in his lungs, bruises on his neck. No witnesses, no clear answers. The king is dead. Chapter 5. The theories. Officially, the state claims suicide by drowning, but the story never sat easily. Ludwig was a strong swimmer. There was no water in his lungs. His body bore no injuries, no clear trauma. Guden, meanwhile, had wounds of a struggle. Some whispered escape attempt. Others suggested murder by the state to prevent a political crisis. A few believed the king had survived, fled, and was living secretly abroad. One farmer later claimed to see Ludwig on a midnight road decades later. None of it was proven. None of it entirely explained the truth. Sank with the king. Chapter 6. The morning when news reached Munich. The capital responded with quiet shock. There was no parade, no national day of mourning, just black-draped portraits and cautious words from the new regent. But in the villages, among the people, grief was real. Church bells rang, candles were lit in windows. At Neuschwanstein, servants covered mirrors with cloth and scattered rose petals in the courtyard. The swans return at dawn the next day. A swan was seen gliding across Lake Starnberg alone, slow, unbothered by wind. Locals claimed it followed the search party, that it circled Ludwig's body once before turning and disappearing into the mist. No one saw it again. Some said it was coincidence. Others said it was the king, saying goodbye. Chapter 7. The funeral. Ludwig's body was dressed in royal attire, dark blue with silver trim. He was placed in an open coffin at the Church of the Theatines in Munich. Thousands passed silently by. Some wept, some bowed, others just stood, staring. His hands were folded over a small silver crucifix, his lips closed in a slight smile. One newspaper wrote, "He is more beautiful in death than he was in sorrow." He was buried in the Wittelsbach crypt with other kings of Bavaria, but his dream would not remain buried. Chapter 8. The Legacy Cast. In stone, Neuschwanstein was not complete when Ludwig died. Rooms unfinished, halls still silent, but within weeks, the Bavarian government, desperate to repay debts, opened the castle to the public, and thousands came, not to mock him, but to see. To walk the corridors, to stand beneath the painted ceilings, to feel what he felt, a place where silence sings, and legend lingers. They called him mad, but they came anyway. The thread he left Ludwig left no heir. No crown passed through his hands. He did not unify a nation, win a war, or sign great treaties, but he left something else. Neuschwanstein, the fairy tale castle that inspired Sleeping Beauty's palace at Disneyland, Herrenchiemsee, a palace with mirrors so perfect you cannot see the end of yourself. Linderhof, where moonlight gardens still reflect golden cherubs. An Astoria, gentle echo of a man who dreamed too long and too beautifully. Final reflection. And so, Ludwig II of Bavaria passed not into the history books of power, but into the margins, the mists, the quiet places where art and sadness meet. He did not want to rule the world. He only wanted to build a better one, a quieter one where dreams walked on stone floors, and swans whispered from the lakes at midnight. If you ever find yourself in the Bavarian mountains, look up. If the sky is clear and the moon is kind, you may see the towers of Neuschwanstein rising above the mist-lonely golden still. The dream did not die, it only changed form. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 4. Sultan Ibrahim I, the Ottoman ruler who drowned in silk the prince in the cage. Welcome back, gentle listener. Tonight, we travel far from the pine forests of Bavaria and the stone walls of Neuschwanstein. We slip instead into the warm air of Istanbul, where seagulls drift over domes, and the Bosphorus whispers quietly between countenance. We pass through the arched gates of Topkapi Palace, beyond rose gardens and tiled fountains, and into a quiet corridor that few ever saw. This is not a palace of celebration. This is the Kefster cage, a hidden wing of the Ottoman court, where princes were neither free nor quite imprisoned. Here, under painted ceilings and behind carved wooden screens, we find a boy named Ibrahim. He will become a sultan, but first he will sit in silence for 20 long years. Chapter 1. Born into silk and shadows, Ibrahim was born in 1615 into the vast and complex world of the Ottoman Empire. His father, Ahmed I, was a capable ruler known for his piety and for building the Blue Mosque, one of Istanbul's crown jewels. But he died young at only 7. Ibrahim was just a baby when the death of his father plunged the palace into a cold ritual of succession. In the Ottoman world, the throne did not always pass from father to son. It passed to whomever could hold it. Sons, brothers, and uncles were all fair contenders. This made succession swift and often lethal. Chapter 2. The law of fratricide, to prevent civil war. The Ottomans developed a brutal custom upon taking the throne. A new sultan would often have his brother's potential rivals executed quietly ritally to preserve the peace, sometimes by strangulation with a silken cord, bloodless, as befitted nobility. And so, when young Ibrahim's older brother, Murad IV, became sultan in 1623, the palace held its breath. Would the boy be spared? Miraculously, yes. Chapter 3. Life in the caves instead of death. Ibrahim was confined to the kefsa, secluded set of rooms within the palace. There, in the company of eunuchs and a few handmaids, he grew up behind lattice screens, no windows. To the outside world, no walks in the garden, just silence, books routine, a stillness that some called peace and others called suffocation. The days without days in the caves, time passed differently. Morning prayers echoed from distant minarets. Meals arrived through curtained doors. Oil lamps flickered in silence. Guards changed shifts without a word. Ibrahim learned to listen for footsteps, the soft tread of slippers on tile, the signal of a friendly servant, or something else. Each day, he wondered, would today be the day they came for me? Chapter 4. A mind in waiting, he began to talk to birds' pigeons that fluttered outside the screens. He fed them crumbs, whispered them secrets. He asked them if the sky was still blue. He spoke often to his mother, Kaksem Sultan, one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. She comforted him. She also reminded him he was a prince, and princes must endure. But even she could not protect his mind from soft unraveling. Chapter 5. Murad's rule outside the cage. His brother, Murad IV, ruled with increasing tyranny. He banned alcohol, coffee, and tobacco, deeming them corrupt. He patrolled the streets in disguise, executing violators on the spot. He led campaigns into Persia, expanding Ottoman territory through force. And at home, he ruled with suspicion, killing advisors, spies, and even family. In 1639, he ordered the execution of his own brother. Bayezid Ibrahim heard the footsteps outside his chamber that night and thought, this is it. But they passed. He survived, again, alone. Chapter 6. Murad's death in 1640. Sultan Murad IV died unexpectedly at the age of 27. He left no sons, only one. Brother remained alive, locked in the cage. Ibrahim. But when the Grand Vizier came to announce the death and offer the throne, Ibrahim refused to believe it. He feared it was a trap, a final test. He is said to have screamed, "Do not mock me. My brother will rise and destroy us all." The Vizier had to swear on the Quran that Murad was truly dead, and only then did the prince step into the light. Chapter 7. Ascension of the Forgotten. After nearly 20 years in isolation, Ibrahim became Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He was 25 years old. He had no military experience, no political training, no formal education, no friends, no trust. But he had the throne. He emerged from the caves in trembling silence, blinking against the sun. The empire bowed before him, and behind his bowed head 1,000 shadows followed. Chapter 8. The Early Reign. At first, Ibrahim deferred to others, to his mother, Kaksem Sultan, who had ruled from behind the scenes for decades, to his Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, to his court astrologers, who chose auspicious days for meetings and decisions. He signed what was placed before him. He nodded when addressed. He smiled rarely, and always faintly. Some believed he might rule as a quiet puppet. Others feared something else, that years of silence had awakened something. Strange. Chapter 9. The turn inward. Brahim began to indulge curiosities. He filled rooms with silk snot, just tapestries, but mountains of fabric. He brought exotic animals into the palace lions, peacocks, doves. He requested a room scented constantly with ambergris and rosewater. He ordered water features that mimicked rain inside his chambers. Some nights he wandered the harem, asking women to perform operatic recitations. Other nights he sat alone, whispering to his reflection in a gold basin. The court began to whisper, "Is this the mind of a man, or the dream of a ghost?" Closing thought down. So we end this first chapter, not in bloodshed or war, but in silence. A boy once confined now wears the crown, but the cage is not made of wood or iron. It is inside him still. Next we'll wander deeper into Ibrahim's ruler reign of indulgence, uncertainty, and silken echoes that blurred the line between madness and monarchy. Whispers in the divan. Asterisk. Welcome back, dear traveller, in the quiet outside. The domes of Istanbul sleep under the velvet of night. The breeze from the Bosphorus is soft. Minarets stand as silhouettes. Oil lamps flicker behind carved shutters in the great Topkapi Palace. Inside, a man walks through corridors heavy with perfume and memory. He is the Sultan, but also a shadow. In this second part of our tale, we explore how Ibrahim, once caged and crowned, ruled from behind scented drapes and soft slippers' decisions twisted by indulgence, fear, and voices heard only in the mind. Let us step quietly into his world. Chapter 1. The Haram of Silk and Strategy. The Haram of the Ottoman court was not merely a place of beauty, was a web of power. Dozens of women, some concubines, others noble hostages, lived within its walls. Each vied for influence, each watched the others through lattice screens and veiled words. At its center sat Qasim, Sultan Brahim's mother, wise, patient, unquestionably powerful for years. She had steered Ottoman policy through her sons, whispering through veils, guiding grand viziers like a queen behind the curtain. But now Ibrahim had begun to resist, not with anger, not with war, but with silence and with silk. Chapter 2. The curtain between. As Ibrahim's independence grew, he began making appointments without counsel. He removed long-standing ministers and replaced them with flatterers and mystics. He took interest not in governance, but in omens, dreams, and textures. He claimed to see meanings in candle smoke. He insisted on having food tasted by 3 eunuchs before he touched it. He developed a deep obsession with Fanatis fashion, but as a form of medicine, he once told a servant. That sable fur whispered secrets at night. No one argued, not directly. Chapter 3. The fetish of the empire. Then came his most famous obsession. Ambergris, a rare waxy substance from the intestines of sperm whales. Used in perfumes, Ibrahim believed it had divine properties. He filled bowls of it in every room. He burned it like incense. He ordered oils made from it for his feet, his sheets, his courtiers. His favorite bath was drawn with rosewater, honey, and ambergris, stirred by hand with golden spoons. When asked why, he simply said, "It binds the soul to the body." Chapter 4. The empire watches outside the harem. Ministers watched anxiously. The empire was still functioning, just barely. The janissaries remained disciplined for now. Tax revenues, though strained, arrived from the provinces. Foreign ambassadors whispered of instability, but avoided outright insult. But beneath the calm surface, cracks widened. Ibrahim began issuing random decrees, some harmless, others disastrous. He once declared that all cats in the capital be painted blue, believing they warded off evil spirits. He emptied the treasury to import thousands of ermine-lined robes, storing them in unused chambers. And worst of all, he began executing those who questioned him. Chapter 5. The Grand Vizier falls in 1643. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, a capable administrator, tried to gently push back against the Sultan's growing whims. He offered cautious counsel. He begged for fiscal restraint. He advised a return to rational statecraft. Within a week, he was dismissed. Within a month, he was dead, strangled quietly, as was tradition. No trial, no announcement, only silence, and new silk curtains ordered for the divan chamber. Chapter 6. The music of the Mirrors. Ibrahim often summoned musicians to play behind folding screens, so he could hear but not see them. He said it helped him think. He would pace the room in jeweled robes, listening to the oud, the ney flute, and the soft thrum of drums. Then he would whisper commands to ascribe borders often contradictory, sometimes indecipherable. One such command read, "The moon has turned her back on Smyrna. Double the garrison. Burn nothing." It was interpreted 3 different ways by 3 different ministers. All acted, none questioned. Chapter 7. The gifts to nowhere. He began sending lavish gifts to cities at random. One village received 300 embroidered pillows. Another, a crate of pink wax candles in the shape of peacocks. He commissioned a fleet of pleasure barges for the Bosphorus, each adorned with swan feathers and cushions soaked in lavender. They were used once, then docked permanently. Chapter 8. The Elephant Dream in 1644. Ibrahim had a vivid dream. He claimed an elephant had spoken to him, offering divine guidance from the Prophet Suleiman. He interpreted this as a sign to begin a military campaign, but the plan was unclear. He issued orders for new horses, revised battle flags, and elephant standards. No one knew what those were. He asked to be taken to the field, then refused to leave the palace. Ultimately, no campaign occurred, but money was spent, supplies diverted, and the empire leaned further into confusion. Chapter 9. The Women and the healers. Ibrahim's attention turned again to the harem. He believed a woman of unmatched girth would bear him a divine son. He ordered searches across the empire for the largest woman alive. One was found, a woman named Bakopa, known for her size and sweetness. He adored her, draped her in diamonds, listened to her dreams. He believed her. Laughter cured headaches. He consulted mystics, astrologers, and physicians. One healer prescribed drinking crushed pearl in wine. Another advised laying on cushions shaped like lions. He did both. Daily. Closing reflection, and so, in golden rooms and beneath painted ceilings, the Sultan ruled, not by will, but by whim. Outside, the empire moved slowly, reluctantly. Inside, silk rustled, incense curled upward, and the Sultan whispered to feathers and stars, "Next, we drift toward the end, when illusions can no longer hold, when power frays beyond repair, and when even the softest cage cannot prevent the tide of history from flowing in. The fall beneath the feathers asterisk, the shadows grow longer now. The palace is quiet too, quiet for a court that once hummed with power, petitions, and poetry. The fountains still murmur in their marble basins. The swans still drift on the ornamental pools, but the throne of the Ottoman Empire stands cold. Sultan Ibrahim, once caged, once crowned, now wanders the corridors of Topkapi, not as master but as a man forgotten by reason, and remembered only by the rustle of silk. Tonight we walk with him to the final hour. Softly, without judgment, let the curtains part. Chapter 1. A Palace Grown Still. It is the summer of 1648. Ibrahim has ruled for 8 strange years. The empire around him has endured stretched thin, but intact. But the cracks have deepened. Rebellions simmer in Anatolia. The navy is neglected. The treasury bleeds silver. And in the coffee houses of Istanbul, poets now speak in metaphors about cages, shadows, and drowning birds. Inside the palace, the mood has changed. Whispers have grown louder. Eyes shift more quickly. Even eunuchs step lightly. Something is approaching. Chapter 2. The people stir. The people of Istanbul are weary. Bread is scarce. Taxes climb like ivy on old stone. And still, the Sultan orders silks, perfumes, fountains shaped like peacocks. A riot begins small. Sudden in the markets near the Golden Horn. Not of fire and fury, of absence. Empty stalls. Closed doors. Quiet refusal. Soon, the Janissaries, elite soldiers of the Sultan, grumble openly. They haven't been paid in months. Their allegiance, once iron, now rusts in silence. They speak of another ruler, someone young, someone unspoiled. Chapter 3. The child Prince Ibrahim has many children, but one stands apart. His son, barely 6 years old, has been watched closely by Kaiksem Sultan, Ibrahim's mother. Kaiksem has ruled before. She knows how to wait. She knows when. Silence becomes survival. And now, she knows it is time. Chapter 4. The Fetvain, the Ottoman system. The Sheikh al-Islam chief, religious authority, can issue a fetwa, a legal religious ruling, in early August 1648. Such a fetwa is quietly prepared. It declares that Sultan Ibrahim is no longer fit to rule, not for heresy, not for cruelty, but for madness that endangers the stability of the Ummah. It is signed, sealed, and delivered, not with trumpet or drum, but with a whisper. Chapter 5. The arrest on the morning of August 8th. The Janissaries gather in the courtyard. They do not shout. They do not charge. They simply walk toward the inner palace. Inside, Ibrahim is in his chamber, pacing as usual, wrapped in a robe of pink velvet, muttering to his mirror. When the guards arrive, he does not resist. He looks at them and says, "Have the stars sent you, too?" And with that, he is led away. Chapter 6. The second Kaj Ibrahim is taken to a chamber deep inside the palace complex. It is quieter than the Kaifest. No servants bring books. No musicians play behind walls. Only 2 guards remain outside at all times. He spends his days seated cross-legged, stroking silks that no longer smell of ambergris. He speaks less, sleeps often, smiles only when he hears the rain. Chapter 7. The end on August 18th, 1648. 10 days after his arrest, the Council of State meets quietly. They determine that Ibrahim is too dangerous to remain alive. They fear rebellion from loyalists. They fear the symbol he represents. A decision is made. The execution is not announced. There is no procession, no public decree. That night, he is strangled with a silken cord. As was custom, as was tradition, as was mercy, he is 33 years old. Chapter 8. Burial without ceremony. Ibrahim's body is washed, wrapped, and buried in Hagia Sophia. Beside his brother Murad, there are no mourners, only silence and scentless flowers. But within days, the palace moves on. The child Memd is declared Memd. The fourth, a new page begins. Fresh ink, old erasures. Chapter 9. The legacy of the feathered throne. History remembers Ibrahim unkindly. He is called Ibrahim the Mad, the silken sultan, the drowned king. But what remains beneath the cruel names? A man raised in silence, kept in gilded shadows, freed only to be feared. He ruled not with fire, but with softness so deep it blurred the line between dream and delusion. He believed in omens, trusted birds, feared mirrors, and sought, in texture and scent, a world kinder than the one that made him. Final reflection. And so, the story of Sultan Ibrahim I ends not with battle, nor with glory, but with a whisper behind a curtain. His name is carved in stone, and in silk, in the corridors of Topkapi. They say, you can still smell ambergris in a certain chamber, that if you stand still long enough, you might hear a voice asking softly, do the peacocks still dance in the rain? Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 5. Emperor Gemin of Northern Wei, the puppet. King in the shadow of eunuchs, a throne without a voice. Good evening, friend. Let the hush of night settle softly around you. Close your eyes, or leave them open, and imagine a world where the very act of speaking could mean power or danger. We go now to Luoyang. In the year 531, stone walls stand beneath a pale sky. The court of Northern Wei is still beautiful, but tired. You walk through paper-paneled halls lit by oil lamps. You hear the whisper of silk shoes on polished floors. You pass guards who don't speak, and scribes who never look up. And there, in the middle of all this, sits a quiet man with a crown that never fit. This is the story of Emperor Gemin, a king who ruled without ruling. Let's begin. Chapter 1. A palace of decline. By the time Yuan Gong was born, the Northern Wei dynasty had already begun to decay. Once powerful, once expansive, the empire was cracking from within, divided by court intrigues, tribal tensions, and military strongmen. Luoyang, the imperial capital, was still a place of grand avenues and graceful towers, but its foundations had grown brittle. The nobles no longer trusted each other. The generals had begun to speak like kings, and in the deepest chambers of the palace, the real power belonged to those without swords or names. Chapter 2. The eunuch's shadow. The Northern Wei court was ruled not by the emperor, but by those closest to him in this time. Power lived in the hands of eunuchs and dowager regents, men who had been cut off from their former lives physically, emotionally, politically, held the keys to the empire. They controlled access to rooms, to letters, to people, to truth. They listened through screens. They watched from shadows. They whispered to those who believed they had power. And so the emperors came and went, while the eunuchs remained. Chapter 3. Yuan Gong. The quiet one. Yuan Gong was born into a noble branch of the royal family, not the direct line of succession, not a child of prophecy or ambition, just a quiet, bookish young man. He was known for his calm demeanor, his clean calligraphy, his habit of not speaking unless asked. He read the classics. He performed rituals without protest. He bowed slightly lower than required. And in an empire cracking from war and conspiracy, this made him ideal, because he posed no threat. Chapter 4. A tumbling throne. In 530, The emperor was Xiaozhuang, a ruler struggling to maintain control. His authority was contested by the powerful general Gao Huan, who had the loyalty of much of the army. There were two governments, one in name, one in action. In late 531, Gao Huan, fearing that Xiaozhuang would turn on him, marched on Luoyang and seized the city. He needed a new emperor, one who would not interfere, one who would appear legitimate, but do as he was told. He chose Yuan Gong, a man so quiet, the records barely mention his voice. Chapter 5, The Unwanted Crownin. February 10th, 531. Yuan Gong was enthroned as Emperor Gemin of Northern Wei. He accepted the title with a short speech. For him, he wore robes picked by others. He sat on a throne whose legs he had never touched before, and when his coronation ended, he was taken not to the imperial residence, but to a small chamber beside the hall of ceremonies. It was furnished with ink, scrolls, and a door that locked from the outside. Chapter 6. Letters without power. As Emperor Gemin was required to issue edicts, formal statements on law, religion, or appointments, but he did not write them. They were drafted by Gao Huan's scribes, sealed with the emperor's stamp. Sometimes, Gemin was asked to read them aloud. Other times, he was not even present. One such edict declared a new tax on landowners, another, the removal of 5 senior officials, another, a ritual holiday in Gao Huan's honor. Gemin signed each one, never protesting, but he kept copies, tucked away in a silk-lined box, notes written in his own hand, small margins, tiny characters, no one ever read them. Chapter 7. The inner voice. We know little of what Gemin thought. There are no surviving diaries, no long records, but one court scribe anonymous, likely a minor functionary, left this note in the margins of a military dispatch. He listens more than he speaks, but his eyes are not empty. Another reported that he often stood facing a blank wall after audiences, that he whispered phrases in classical verse to no one in particular, that he had once copied the Analects of Confucius 7 times by hand, and that his only personal request was for silk that made no sound when moved. Chapter 8. The Mandate of Shadowzin. The philosophy of Chinese rulership. The mandate of heaven gave legitimacy to the emperor, but it could also be withdrawn. Gemin knew this. He knew that his position existed not because of heaven, but because a warlord allowed it. In public, he bowed and blessed. In private, he fasted for days, claiming stomach illness. When generals visited, he smiled thinly. When priests asked for audiences, he declined with polite sorrow. He never questioned his orders. He never raised his voice. He never tried to rule, because he understood. He had never been chosen, only placed. Closing thought. And so we leave him for now, seated alone in a lacquered chamber, copying lines from ancient books, the doors behind him closing with quiet finality. He is emperor in name, but no one bows from love, only routine, only fear, only habit. And in the gardens outside, the last plum blossoms fall unseen next. We follow the quiet unraveling of Gemin's brief reign, his final acts, the moment he dared to speak, and the silence that greeted him in return. The silence that ruled the throne. Welcome back. The sky above Luoyang is pale with early mist. Paper lanterns sway faintly beneath tiled eaves. Courtiers walk the halls of the imperial city, their slippers making no sound. The clatter of the past has dimmed. The cries of the future are still unborn. Here, in this brief, breathing moment, silence rules. not the silence of peace. Not quite, but the silence of hesitation, of things left unsaid, of a throne occupied but not wielded. We return now to Emperor Gemin, whose hands touch the scrolls of state, but whose fingertips never leave a mark. Chapter 1. The Emperor Who Listened. There are few surviving edicts from Emperor Gemin's reign. Fewer still bear his actual handwriting, and yet historians say his ears never closed. He listened to every report, every whisper carried in by cold-eyed messengers from the provinces. He listened to tax collectors describe drought in the west. He listened to grain officials quietly argue about miscounts. He listened to generals speak of loyalty, while fingering sword hilts too tightly. But most of all, he listened to what was not said. He heard absence, and it haunted him more than any battle. Cried. Chapter 2. Standing alone in ceremony twice each month, the emperor walked the hall of supreme harmony. Flanked by guards and eunuchs, he offered incense. To heaven, he read rites aloud from ancient texts. He offered blessings to the people who were never present. This ritual had persisted for centuries, but now the ministers no longer kneeled with respect. They bowed out of form, not faith. Even the priests recited words with dull precision, and Gemin felt it. He did not protest. He did not rebuke them. Instead, he whispered his final prayer to himself. May the mandate rest lightly on me, for I do not carry it willingly. Chapter 3. The general in the north far from Luoyang. Gao Wan, the warlord who placed Gemin on the throne, was growing restless. He controlled vast armies. He ruled large provinces in all but name, and he had begun to resent the continued pretense. Why rule from the shadows, he wondered, when daylight was within reach? Letters from Gao Wan arrived at the capital, thick with implication. They demanded tribute. They demanded titles. They praised the emperor's wisdom, while suggesting trusted guidance was needed for the empire to endure. To Gemin, the message was clear: obey, or disappear. Chapter 4. The red ink refusal. A rare moment of defiance. Gemin did something unexpected. He delayed one of Gao Wan's requests. Just 3 days, he asked for clarifications and grain levies, military movements, coinage reform. He wrote a question in red inca, symbol of imperial concern. The eunuchs panicked. No. One had seen him use red since his enthronement. A clerk reportedly fainted. Another left the palace, fearing implication. Gao Wan's response was swift and quiet. The next letter arrived with no signature, just the words, "Silence is preferable, Majesty." Gemin never used red again. Chapter 5. The Hall of Echoes within the palace. Gemin spent increasing time in a room known as the Hall of Echoes, A long corridor lined with curved tiles designed to carry whispers from one end to the other. Built as a symbol of transparency, it had long since become a game for bored ministers. Gemin walked its length alone. He tested phrases. Is heaven listening? Do the ancestors approve? Sometimes he stood still for hours, waiting to hear his own voice return. But it never did. One night, a eunuch approached quietly and asked if he needed warmth. Jemin replied, "No, I only wanted to hear something." True. Chapter 6. The Secret Petitions. Sometime in early 532, a scholar named Li Song delivered a petition. It was brief, written in simple script. It asked the emperor to reclaim his voice, to assert the throne, to appoint EUNUCHS, to appoint new advisors, to speak. Once, truly, Gemin did not respond publicly, but a week later, Li Song was sent away given a provincial post in the far west. Historians debate whether this was exile or protection. Li Song lived a long life. He never wrote of the court again, but in his will he included a line: he did not move the wheel, but he knew where it turned. Chapter 7. The Paper Bird. One spring morning, a child servant found a paper crane placed on the emperor's desk. It was delicate, perfectly folded, made from discarded palace stationery. Inside it, written in soft brushstrokes, "Even the bird in a cage sings its song." Gemin kept the crane, placed it in a wooden box beside his scrolls, and the next day, during audience, he smiled for the first and only time. Chapter 8. The shadow behind the throne unrest grew outside the capital. Famine in the south, bandits in the east, refugees streamed into Luoyang by the hundreds. But inside the palace, all remained still, until one evening, a trusted eunuch whispered into the emperor's ear, "There are rumors of replacement." Gemin nodded once. He had expected this, he said. "Then let them find one who desires the seat." The eunuch hesitated, then added, "It may be your cousin, Yuan Shanzhen." Another nod, another silence. Then Gemin simply asked, "Will he enjoy the ceremonies?" Chapter 9. The night of no wind. It is said that on the final night of his reign, Gemin sat in the central courtyard for hours. He burned no incense. He held no scroll. He simply watched the moon pass over the lacquered tiles. A servant approached with news, but he raised one hand and said, "Let me have a moment with." "No duty," the servant bowed, and Gemin, still quiet, whispered, "All thrones are borrowed. I only wished to leave it cleaner than I found it." Chapter 10. The Silent Abdication. In the summer of 532, Gao Huan marched on Luoyang once more. There was no resistance, no protest. On June 2nd, a declaration was read removing Emperor Gemin from the throne. In his place, Yuan Shanzhen, a distant cousin, was installed as Emperor Shaowo. Gemin was not present. He had already packed his few scrolls, left the imperial seal, and quietly walked to the temple of ancestors, where he would live, under soft guard, not a prisoner, not quite, just a memory. Closing reflection. And so ends the silent reign of Emperor Gemin. He left no policies, no monuments, no wars, but in a world of ambition, cruelty, and control, he offered a different legacy: stillness, observation, and the quiet belief that not acting may sometimes be the strongest act of all. In our final section, we'll walk slowly beside Gemin's final days, his exile, his meditations, and the gentle erasure of a man who ruled like a ghost and disappeared like a breeze. A name that faded softly, asterisk. The stars now hang lower over Luoyang. The wind barely stirs the prayer flags, and the footsteps in the palace grow more infrequent, softer, as though the very halls are forgetting how to echo. Tonight, we conclude the quiet story of Emperor Gemin, not with rebellion, not with glory, but with the slow, almost unnoticed retreat of a man whose name, like a page unturned, faded back into the silence from which it came. Let us walk these final corridors together, where incense fades, scrolls yellow, and only stillness remains. Chapter 1. The cloister at the edge of the city. After his removal in 532, Emperor Gemin was not executed. He was not imprisoned. he was relocated a modest residence at the edge of the capital, near the southern cloister of the ancestral temples, became his new home. It had no court, no guards, only a gardener, an elderly servant, and 3 eunuchs tasked with his care. Each morning, he rose before sunrise, walked the moss-covered stones, and sat beneath a ginkgo tree that flowered rarely, but golden when it did. He called the place Sheng Yuan, the Silent Garden. Chapter 2. The books Hikari Juman brought few possessions from the palace. A bamboo scroll of the analects worn at the corners, a stitched journal filled with his own copied verses, a lacquered box containing a single paper crane, a brush he had not used in years, and a robe the color of dry plum skin, once worn during his short enthronement. He kept these near, but used them rarely. Instead, he listened to birds in the eaves dart, to servants muttering softly in the kitchen, to the silence between bell rings from the cloister down the hill. Chapter 3. The visits that never came in the first weeks of his exile. There were rumors that ministers might visit him in secret, that envoys from Gaowan would arrive with questions, that the new emperor, Yuan Shenzhen, might send word. None of these things happened. Time passed. The new court wrote no mention of Gemin. Historians later searched archives for documents bearing his name after his dethronement. They found 2. One was a grain inventory, noting surplus in the outer kitchens. The other, a footnote in a tax report, referring to a former court resident, currently under temple protection. His name had become an echo. Chapter 4. The old gardener, the gardener at Sheng Yuan, had no surname. He had once served under Emperor Chaoan. He limped slightly and smelled of clove root. He taught Gemin how to clip the camellias, how to water herbs at the root, not the leaves, and how to read clouds for frost. They rarely spoke, but when they did, it was with slow, considered words. Once, while pruning a withered plum tree, the gardener said, "Even trees know when to rest." Gemin replied, "Then I shall learn from them," and he did. Each season, he followed the same rhythm: cut, water, wait, and say nothing. Chapter 5. The monk's questions. The Taoist monk from the nearby cloister came occasionally to leave food or incense. He bowed, but not too deeply. One day, while pouring tea, he asked gently, "What did the throne feel like, if I may ask?" Gemin thought for a long while, then answered, "It was like holding a bird made of dust. Beautiful, yes, but never yours to keep." They drank in silence, and the monk never asked again. Chapter 6. The night he burned his seal one winter night, Gemin asked for his old imperial seal. It had been returned to him in a folded cloth made of jade, carved with characters now half-raced. He stared at it for hours. Then, without ceremony, he placed it on a stone and struck it once with the back of a ladle dot. It cracked cleanly. He threw the pieces into the brazier. The next morning, he told the eunuchs, "Let no one be burdened with false authority." They nodded and made no note of it in their daily reports. Chapter 7. The sparrow who returned in the 4th year of his quiet exile. A small sparrow began visiting his windowsill. It pecked at crumbs. It chirped faintly. He named it Yuan not for himself, but for the circle of things. One day, it did not come. The gardener said it had likely flown south for warmer air. Gemin nodded, but said nothing. That evening, he folded a new paper crane and left it on the windowsill. It blew away in the wind. and he did not replace it. Chapter 8. The dream of the empty court. Toward the end, Gemin is said to have spoken more in dreams than in waking. The old eunuch who cared for him noted in his journal, "He murmurs names I do not recognize. Perhaps ancestors, perhaps memories." One night he woke and said, "I dreamed the court was filled with birds. No robes, no men, just birds, and they listened better." Then he fell asleep again. Smiling. Chapter 9. The final gardening. The spring of 535. The camellias bloomed early. The gardener said it was a sign of early rain. Gemin knelt to prune them, then stood slowly and said, "Perhaps it is time." He returned to his chamber, lay down in his robe, closed his eyes, and did not rise again. There was no declaration, no mourning banners, no state ceremony. He was buried near the temple, under a plum tree that flowered once every 5 years. A stone was placed. It read only, "Here rested the wind." Final reflection. And so ends the life of Emperor Gemin of Northern Wei. He ruled without ruling. He obeyed without believing. He disappeared without vanishing. And in doing so, he left behind a rare silence, one not of fear, but of peace. In a world where ambition shouted, his quiet became a form of resistance, and in the end, his name barely written remained not in records, but in the breath between pages.